Hi teachers, it's Ms. Pusio, your virtual content specialist for grade 3 HMH into reading. And for today's teacher-facing video tutorial, we are in module 10, lesson 5, Tell a Tale. And the focus question is, why is it important to pass stories down to the next generation? So for this lesson, with students, you're explaining the author's use of sound devices, imagery, and you're reading aloud to investigate figurative language. Now, figurative language can be difficult for students, even though it comes up often, because I find it, especially for English language learning students, students with disabilities, even general education students, it could be very difficult for students to, I believe, name the types of figurative language, even just to memorize it, similes, metaphors, onomatopoeia, just there's so many different types, and then to point it out in a text, remember what it is, then on top of it to figure out why the author is using it, why it's important. It could be a lot. So I just want to kind of give you a scaffold that you can use either whole group, small group, to do it synchronously, asynchronously, it doesn't really matter, but just a nice scaffold using something called a thinking map. A thinking map is really different from a graphic organizer. What a thinking map does is it gives students a pattern of prediction for thinking. So, graphic organizers are great, and, all different types of, teachers use different types of graphic organizers for students, but, if we use a different type of organizer for main idea one year, and we use a different one the next year, the students don't really make connections between what type of thinking process, we use for main idea, or use for categorizing things, or use for sequence, So with thinking maps, even though that would take a very, very long, different type of training, and you may or may not be familiar with them, what's great about thinking maps is there's 8 of them, and you can even Google them if you don't really know much about them, and they can be used in any content area for any subject, and students begin to take ownership of them. And what's great is they begin to really take ownership of them, and when the students begin to realize what type of thinking goes along with which type of map, they begin to understand and really can take ownership of that. So for example, today we're using this map called the tree map, and this is really for categorizing things. So the underlying thinking process for a tree map is classification and organization, and it really helps students take a look at the text and understanding text structures, organizing things, putting things into categories, and it really helps them understand information, put into categories, and really section things. And regardless of content area level, it can really help them, organize their thinking. So I thought that this was a great way to help students look through a text and look for different types of figurative language, pull it out, name it, and then give the example, instead of just giving random different organizers. And this way, anytime they have to classify and organize things, they can associate it with a tree map. So to make a tree map is very easy. On the top, you have the subject, and then you can make as many subcategories as you want. It doesn't just have to be 3, because obviously there's different types of figurative language, not just 3. And then on the bottom would be the supporting areas. So in the passage, when the giant stirred, obviously as a teacher, you're going to be looking over the passage prior to the students reading it, just like I did, and we're not going to be seeing every type of figurative language in there. So as I was going through it, I noticed there was only certain types of figurative language present in there. So we don't really want them hunting for all the different types of figurative language that are in there that are not present. So you may want to front load the ones that are in there. So for example, in the passage, I'm going to just bring it up for you. If we go to when the giant stirred, and we're in the passage, somewhere in the passage we noticed here where it says it let out a puff of smoke or rumbled like a giant. So we noticed that there's a simile there. So then you might want to front load, going over similes with the students and setting up. So I'm going to make a student-facing video later going over similes with the students. And then later on in the passage, I believe on page 373, there is alliteration, imagery, and personification here. So we have barren, black rock, in a blue sea. And then here we have personification. The mountain in its fury had split apart. So that's pretty difficult, I think, for students to just pop out as personification. So I think that front-loading imagery on alliteration and similes to the students would be a great idea. So what I would do is kind of go over those with them in the beginning as a mini lesson, and then I'm just going to show you quick how to set up just for maybe a Jamboard, I would say. So in Google Slides, what I'm going to do is I inserted a text box here, and I typed in "When the Giant Stirred, examples of figurative language." And I'm just going to go ahead and do this from the beginning here. I'm going to go to Insert, Line, make a line here. Okay, then I'm going to go to Insert Text Box again. So we had simile. And then you just might want to just give like a little mini scaffold, put like or as, just to really help your students out there. I think that would just be helpful to them, honestly. Okay, then I'm going to go ahead and copy this again. And then we also had personification. And put here human-like qualities, just so they have a little definition there. And then we had alliteration. Just to give them a little bit of a support here, I think would be very helpful. Okay, so here I have a tree map ready for them to go. I'm just gonna make it look a little more like a tree map with the lines here. And then go ahead and copy and paste that, just so it's there. Okay, then I'm going to save this as a picture. All right, so it's downloaded, and then I'm going to go into a Jamboard here. So I've opened up a clear Jamboard, and I'm going to click Set Background just so that they can't change the backgrounds here. And I'm going to upload and go to my downloads, which should be right here in my last download. And now they kind of can't change anything. So then you can either do it in a small group, in a larger group with all of the students, however you see fit, and then that way you can kind of have it targeted for the students, so then they can go into their post-its and then go over it. So let's say you're reading it with them and you're on that other page in the beginning, and okay, boys and girls, we're looking for these types of figurative language, and it says it let out a puff of smoke or rumbled like a giant. So we'll see what the students notice, and then when they're in the Jamboard, this is an easier way for them to classify it without them being kind of overwhelmed and with no kind of support other than just looking at an anchor chart, especially for those students who are having trouble with language acquisition or remembering. So then they would put their sticky note. So we would have rumbled like a giant. Let's say one student put that there. And again, this would also be a great check for formative assessment to see their understanding and help them organize their thinking. And again, it can be done synchronously, asynchronously. It's just a great support for them, and also with front loading those specific definitions just to kind of help them see exactly what they're looking for.